In most 3D games, the player character has an idle animation. When no input movement is being applied, the character may resort to a single looping animation or a set of animations that can be programmed to play at different intervals as the developers see fit. While these can often be overlooked or taken for granted, I feel that idle animations are an important part of creating a character within the game world. Today, I'm going to be doing a breakdown and a recreation of this animation of Spyro from The Legend of Spyro: The Eternal Night in hopes of becoming a better animator. Before I get started, I have some technical information to cover, just so that I'm not slinging a bunch of jargon around without uninformed viewers not having any context. When creating animations, we need to be aware of the concept of animation curves. An animation curve is a graphical representation of a path that an object follows in a 3D space during an animated motion. I know that sounds like a word salad. I hope this visual kind of helps tie it together. There are these two types of curves, and in my experience, they are kind of used interchangeably when discussing animation. There's the paths that can be identified in a 3D space, and the mathematical representation of these paths within a curve. You don't need to understand the math that's happening under the hood to, make animations. I think animating with curves is more of a cultivated sense of intuition. Before I dive into breaking down this animation, I'm going to rapidly show you a demonstration of the curves in the graph editor. You see, if I grab his foot and create a keyframe for the foot's Y position up here, I can go down to my graph editor, locate the curve, and start creating animation for it. If I drag my scrubber to the middle of the animation and insert a keyframe, I can grab that keyframe on this curve and then make tweaks to it. As you can see, when I drag the keyframe either up and down along the graph, it pushes the curve, it pushes his foot to either our left or our right. I hope that kind of clears some things up. With this technical information out of the way, let's get started. I'm going to break down this animation by sections and tackle them in this particular order. I'm going to start with the spine, so his chest and his hips, followed by the head and the tail. I'm going to tackle the wings last. Well, technically the face is going to be last, but that's I'm going to tackle the wings last, as they are more akin to secondary movements, but they are also what tripped me up the most because they create some weird animation arcs that I pulled my hair out trying to figure out how to recreate. So, as I understand it, Spyro's idle animation here seems to be simulating breathing, but I can't say what the intention of the animators, what intentions the animators had as they were building this animation. Anyway, the majority of the motion in his core appears to be coming from his chest. It follows a simple circular path, and it starts and stops in the same area, so, creating a loop. Recreating this in Blender is pretty easy with the rig that I built for it. First, I'll create keyframes and take care to copy the positions as best I can from my reference footage. Next, I'll create a motion path for his chest bone. Using this motion path as my guide, I can adjust my keyframed positions as needed. The approach is very much the same with his hips, although there isn't nearly as much movement as there is in his chest. I only needed about 2 keyframes and very little adjustment to make it feel right. I suppose one could argue that the head movement is a secondary animation in of itself, but for all intents and purposes, we're being flexible here. His head bobs just a little bit before returning to its starting position, and the head is also offset from his chest by just a few frames, so it creates that secondary movement, just a little push forward, a little nudge. Animating the tail was pretty easy. I set the starting frame to have all of the bones curved to the right, and then I copied my pose, and I moved the scrubber, pasted the pose in about the middle, mirrored it, and then I copied the starting pose again, and pasted them at the end of the animation cycle. This does create a loop, but it looks really stiff in comparison to the original animation. This is because there is I think it's like an in-between pose between the main keyframes. Thankfully, it's pretty easy to create if we just isolate the last few tailbones and scrub to like right around in between these two keyframes, and then bend the tailbones just a little bit to like create this. With only these bones selected, I will copy this pose. I'll move to the other point in the timeline in between these two main poses. I'll paste the pose, flip it, and test it out, and there we have it. A snappy little tail animation. Quite a bit of personality here. I think I had to add like maybe 1 or 2 more keyframes in between here to really sell the bendy snap of his spade, but other than that, I'm content with it. Cool. Now, on to the part that gave me the most trouble, which was animating his wings. For starters, to visually break down the animation into 2 main parts to understand. And one is this section of like what I've been calling his wing upper arm, and the second section is the wing forearm. So the wing upper arm, this first portion, moves strictly with rotation-based motion. It does inherit a little bit of movement from the chest bone, as that's how I've got it parented. So there is that to consider. There is no scale, and there is no translation. From what I can see or understand, the large chunk of this motion of the bones is on the local Z and the local X axis. There's a tiny bit of rotation on the local Z and the local X axis to create a slightly larger curve. The second portion of his wing was much trickier. It moves in much of the same way, but with a slight delay in comparison to the parent bone. Once again, it's rotating mostly on the local Z and the local X axis. This one is also tricky because it may not have seemed like it, but there is just a tiny, like a degree's worth of rotation on the local Y axis. Very, very upsetting. I nearly pulled my hair out until it clicked for me. Recreating these curves was significantly harder than I anticipated. However, I learned that this is in part to me not setting my interpolation settings correctly. The animation may have looped, but it was looping weirdly, with an awkward popping, like pause at the end of the cycle. I corrected this later down the line, though. My first attempt at recreating this animation was with an IK system, but it was unsuccessful, and even though I learned quite a bit, my successful attempt was with, regular FK animation. Whew. With that out of the way, we are almost there. The last little bit of detail is that there is this really subtle movement in his eyebrows and eyes. It's a very small animation, but it helps. It reaches its keyframes at about the same time as the chest does. All it is that the eyebrows are just going up and down, up and down. Same with his eyes. They're not really, it's like they're tracked to something specific, but I added just a little bit of delay, just a teeny tiny bit to create a curve down here, and that's it. Idle animation is complete. Okay, I'm pretty content with how this looks. Just for fun, I went ahead and threw the keyframe data onto Cinder, just because I can, and I've always wondered what it would look like, and it doesn't quite look right on her. Her wings are much larger than Spyro's, and they're also set to like a different configuration, like angle-wise. So it looks like a really dramatic movement in comparison to his. But yeah, that is all from me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have an awesome day. Bye-bye!